Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a whole bunch of climate news.
Yeah.
We've got articles from all over the place, the LA Times, New York Times, the Daily Climate, even some NASA stuff.
Wow.
We're going to try to cut through all the noise and figure out what you need to know.
Yeah, it's a lot out there.
Yeah, it is. So
Yeah.
let's jump right in. I guess President Trump is back in the headlines again for his environmental policies.
Or lack thereof, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it seems like every day there's a new announcement of some kind of climate action being rolled back.
Well, yeah, and it's not just like one or two things. It's kind of everything.
It really is.
He's targeting funding for conservation projects on the Colorado River to logging regulations in like national forests.
Yeah, the Colorado River situation is especially worrying.
Yeah.
The Daily Climate had a piece about that, and they were talking about how the farmers who depend on those funds to conserve water are now kind of left in a lurch.
Yeah.
And the drought is already so bad.
Oh, it's huge. And, that river is a lifeline for millions of people
Right.
across the entire Southwest.
Yeah.
Cutting those funds is a really big problem, especially with that increasing water scarcity.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you have the move to increase logging in national forests.
Which just doesn't make any sense.
No, it seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
When we're trying to, preserve forests as carbon sinks.
Well, yeah, I mean, the forests, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and increasing logging just puts more carbon into the air right back where we don't want it.
Right.
It's like one step forward, two steps back.
The New York Times piece I read on that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that, we have the Trump administration trying to remove the finding that greenhouse gases are dangerous.
Yeah. Inside Climate News had a piece about that, and it's a really big deal because it would basically gut the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases.
It seems like they're trying to tie the hands of the agency tasked with protecting our environment.
Exactly. And it's not just about the EPA. This sets a precedent for how we deal with scientific evidence and make policy based on facts.
Yeah, this whole thing is going to be a legal battle for sure.
That already is.
The Daily Climate was pointing out that there are lawsuits all over the place already challenging these rollbacks. But even if the courts rule against the administration, will they actually comply?
Yeah, who knows?
It's a really important question.
Yeah, it undermines our system of checks and balances.
Yeah, situation to watch closely.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving beyond U.S. politics, let's talk about what's happening globally.
Sure.
The Daily Climate also had some reports about record ocean heat waves, which are very concerning.
Yeah, it just shows us that climate change is happening right now,
Yeah.
and its effects are accelerating.
Yeah.
Warmer oceans lead to a lot of problems, like more intense storms, rising sea levels, and disruptions to marine ecosystems.
Yeah, they were saying that these heat waves are costing billions of dollars in damages and lost revenue.
Yeah.
It's not just an environmental problem anymore, it's an economic one as well.
It really is, and those economic impacts are going to hit coastal communities hardest.
Yeah.
And industries that rely on the ocean, like fishing and tourism.
It's pretty scary to think about what the future holds if we don't get a handle on that.
Yeah, we really need to turn things around. And it's not just the heat. The melting ice sheets are another huge problem, especially in Antarctica. The Conversation and Inside Climate News both had articles on a new study projecting a 20% slowdown of the Antarctic circumpolar current by 2050.
Wait, the Antarctic circumpolar current? What is that?
No.
And why should we care about it?
It's the strongest ocean current in the world.
Wow.
And it basically regulates global climate patterns.
Okay.
You can think of it like a giant conveyor belt
Okay.
that circulates heat and nutrients through the ocean.
Okay.
Slowing that down could have huge impacts on weather patterns, marine ecosystems, and even global temperatures.
So it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
The melting ice impacts the currents,
Yeah.
which then impacts the entire planet. These changes are so unpredictable and difficult to adapt to.
Yeah. And it just shows how interconnected all of the Earth's systems are.
Speaking of interconnectedness, Climate Home News had a piece about how the international community can agree on the timing of some key climate science reports from the IPCC.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the IPCC is the leading international body for assessing climate science.
Right?
So the fact that they can't even agree on a timeline for these reports is a bit worrying.
It is. It really is, because those reports are crucial for policymakers to make good decisions.
Right.
But it just highlights how hard international cooperation is.
Yeah, it seems like we're constantly running out of time.
Yeah.
Scientists are sounding the alarm.
Yeah.
Policymakers are struggling to keep up.
Yeah.
And then in the midst of all of this, we've got to figure out what role businesses and industries play in the transition to a cleaner future.
Yeah, and we're getting a lot of mixed signals from the corporate world.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have oil companies that are talking about all the investments they're making in renewable energy and how they're committed to net zero emissions.
Which basically means balancing out the amount of greenhouse gases released with the amount that's removed from the atmosphere.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, you have NPR reporting that many of these same companies are actually doubling down on fossil fuel production.
It's like they're saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words.
Right. And in this case, it seems like short-term profits are winning out over long-term sustainability.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case, and it's not just the big oil companies either.
Oh, right. Climate Home News had a piece about Pemex.
Yeah, Mexico's state-owned oil company.
Right. And they pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, but they're having a hard time controlling methane leaks from their operations.
Which is a big problem because methane is a way more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Right. It just highlights the fact that setting these ambitious goals is one thing, but achieving them,
It's a whole other thing.
yeah, it takes technology and infrastructure upgrades and a real commitment to change.
Right.
Yeah, we need to hold these companies accountable for their promises
We do.
and make sure that what they're saying matches what they're actually doing.
Absolutely. But there is some good news coming from the tech world.
Right?
Canary Media had a piece about some startups that are working to turn fossil gas into hydrogen without any emissions.
Interesting.
Yeah, if they can figure that out on a large scale, it would be a huge development for decarbonizing industries that rely on natural gas.
Yeah, so instead of burning natural gas directly, which
Mhm.
releases carbon dioxide,
Right.
they would use it to create hydrogen, which can be used as a clean fuel source.
That's the idea. It's still in the early stages, but it's definitely promising.
It's a race against time, isn't it?
It really is. We need solutions now,
Yeah,
but we also can't afford to put all our eggs in one basket.
right.
We need a lot of different solutions to solve this problem.
And it's not just about technology, right?
Right.
We need grassroots action and community-led initiatives as well.
Absolutely, because climate change isn't just some abstract global issue. It's impacting people right now in their daily lives.
Yeah, speaking of which, the LA Times had some stories about protests and activism
Oh, yeah.
related to climate change.
Let's talk about those next
I
time.
think that's good.
They're a good reminder that climate change isn't just about melting glaciers and rising sea levels. It's about people.
Yeah, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and dive into those local stories.
Yeah, so these local stories are a good example of how climate change is hitting people where they live, like in Southern California.
Okay.
The LA Times covered protests that are happening over National Park Service staffing cuts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it seems like budget cuts are making it even harder to protect our parks.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. What's the impact been like on the ground?
Well, a lot of the off-duty rangers and even community members are super worried because they see firsthand how these cuts are impacting the parks,
Right.
like the maintenance and, visitor safety and even the ability to respond to things like wildfires.
Which are only becoming more frequent because of climate change.
Exactly. It's like they're not connecting the dots.
Yeah, they're not thinking ahead.
Yeah, it's very short-sighted.
And speaking of wildfires, the LA Times also had a story about firefighters marching in Big Sur to protest climate inaction.
Yeah, can you imagine you're just out camping, having a nice quiet time, and then all of a sudden a bunch of firefighters show up demanding action on climate change?
Yeah, that would definitely get your attention.
I think so. It just shows how worried everyone is.
Yeah.
Especially the people who are dealing with these fires firsthand.
Yeah, and while those protests were happening in California, the Daily Climate reported on opposition growing in Louisiana over proposed carbon capture projects.
Yeah, a lot of folks there are worried about water contamination.
Yeah, carbon capture is often talked about as a solution, but it's not without risks.
Definitely not. I mean, there are lots of different types of carbon capture technologies, and each one has its own, level of effectiveness and cost and potential environmental impact.
Right.
So the people of Louisiana, especially those who have been dealing with pollution and environmental injustice for so long, are understandably wary.
Yeah, for sure. It raises important questions about, who bears the risks and burdens of these climate solutions.
That's right.
Climate action needs to be fair and equitable.
Absolutely. We can't leave anyone behind.
And these concerns about justice are playing out on an even larger scale in British Columbia.
Oh, how so?
Well, the Daily Climate reported that the government there is trying to speed up energy and resource projects,
Oh, okay.
including things like wind and LNG and mining developments. But First Nations leaders are saying that they're being ignored and their rights are being violated.
Oh, that's not good.
No, it's a common story. Economic interests clashing with indigenous rights and environmental concerns. Some legal experts are saying that this could lead to all sorts of court battles and could actually delay these projects even more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a good reminder that we need to do things the right way.
For sure.
Meaningful consultation with indigenous communities and respecting their sovereignty and ensuring that their voices are heard.
Yeah, we can't just steamroll over people.
Exactly. And then on the other side of the political spectrum, Climate Change Dispatch reported on some backlash against climate policies in Democrat-led states.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it seems like rising energy bills are fueling some anger and blame.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, no one wants to pay more for energy.
Of course not, but it's important to remember that there are a lot of factors that contribute to energy prices.
Oh, for sure.
It's not always as simple as blaming one policy or one party.
Exactly. Energy prices are influenced by global supply and demand, geopolitical events, government regulations, all sorts of things.
Right, and in this case, it seems like some consumers are connecting their higher energy bills to green policies.
Even though those policies might not be the main driver of the price increase.
Exactly.
It's tough.
Yeah, it highlights the need for more transparency and honest conversations about the cost of transitioning to a clean energy economy.
Yeah, we need to make sure that the transition is fair.
Right.
And that it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
And speaking of shifting political landscapes, we can't forget about the emergence of new voices in the climate debate.
Yeah, who are you thinking of?
Well, the Daily Climate had an interesting piece about this youth-led conservative climate group called the American Conservation Coalition.
The ACC?
Yeah, you heard them?
Yeah, I have.
They're advocating for market-based solutions to climate change, things like nuclear energy and carbon capture technology, and using natural gas as a bridge fuel.
That's interesting.
It's a different approach than what we usually hear from environmental groups, and it's gaining traction within the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's great to see a conservative group actively engaged in the climate debate.
That's refreshing, right?
Yeah, it shows that there's a growing recognition that we need to act now regardless of your political affiliation.
Yeah. It gives me hope that maybe we can find some common ground and work together on this.
Me too. It's easy to get discouraged when you're bombarded with all this bad news.
It really is.
But it's important to remember that there are people out there who are fighting for a better future.
Yeah, there's a growing movement of individuals and communities and businesses and even politicians who are all working towards the same goal.
And that gives me hope.
Wow. That is a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really is.
From political battles to technology to protests to, international negotiations, it seems like climate change touches every aspect of our lives.
It does, and it's all connected, which is what's so crazy about it.
Speaking of those connections, those startups that are working to turn fossil gas into hydrogen without emissions,
Yeah.
that really stood out to me.
It's a very promising.
If they can figure that out on a large scale, that would be a huge development.
It would, but we still need a lot of different solutions to solve this problem.
Right. We can't put all our eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
It's going to take everything we've got. Technology, policy changes, individual actions, community initiatives. We need it all.
And we need to make sure that those solutions are fair and equitable.
Right. Climate justice has to be at the forefront of our efforts.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We talked about Trump's environmental rollbacks, the reports about ocean heat waves and melting ice, the challenges of international cooperation, the complexities of carbon capture,
Yeah.
the protests and activism that are happening, the rising energy costs that are fueling political debates, and even new voices in the climate movement like the ACC.
It's a lot.
It really is. It's enough to make your head spin. So out of all of that, what stands out to you what feels the most urgent or surprising?
I think for me, it's just the interconnectedness of it all.
Right.
Climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a social issue, an economic issue, a political issue, a justice issue. It's all tied together.
That's so true. We can't address climate change in isolation.
Yeah.
We have to think about those ripple effects
Right.
and the unintended consequences and the systemic changes that are needed to really create a sustainable future.
It makes you think about how are we going to transform our energy systems, our transportation systems, our food systems? How do we create a more just and equitable society? I mean, those are big questions.
They are daunting questions, but it's also kind of exciting in a way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to reimagine our world, to build something better, something more sustainable, and something more just.
I like that. It all starts with awareness, right? Understanding the challenges and opportunities and engaging in these conversations.
Well said. Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to leave everyone with one final thought to ponder today. We talked about melting ice and how it impacts ocean currents.
Mm.
But what about the ocean's ability to absorb heat? What happens if the oceans, which have been absorbing, massive amounts of heat trapped by greenhouse gases, start to absorb less?
Oh, wow.
What does that mean for us here on land?
The question worth thinking about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the latest climate news.
It was fun.
We'll see you next time.